You know, there are just a handful of people in this world that can go by just one name and are instantly recognizable to us all. There's Elvis and Cher and Prince. There's Cleopatra and Jesus and Buddha. And there's Gandhi. Gandhi, the short, skinny, bald-headed Indian man who led one of the greatest movements for liberation and independence in human history. What do you think of when you think of Gandhi? His commitment to nonviolence, his fasting, those spectacles, right? Of course, more recently, we've thought about some of his problematic attitudes and words about race and gender as well. One of the most famous quotes from Gandhi is, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Well, historians tell us that Gandhi did not actually say that. What he really said was, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a person changes their own nature, so does the attitude of the world change toward them. We need not wait to see what others will do. Well, I am not a historian, and no one is checking this sermon for footnotes. So I'm just going to say, as far as we're concerned today, be the change that you want to see in the world is close enough to what Gandhi actually said. I would venture to bet that most of us have heard that quote more than a few times before. You may have seen it on a bumper sticker, or a refrigerator magnet, or a meme on Facebook, or maybe as the tagline to a friend's email. It is quite a popular saying. I used to hang out with a Unitarian Universalist minister who had those words from Gandhi tattooed on her body. Somewhere respectable, I can assure you. Be the change you want to see in the world. We have all heard that so many times before. We all just naturally nod in recognition of its wisdom. But today I want to tell you that I am not so sure that I want to embrace that, at least not in its simplified slogan form. Perhaps that is because everybody seems to agree with it, and I am naturally suspicious about anything that everyone agrees on. And I think we all agree about it because it is such a short and succinct way of stating something that is both incredibly obvious and at the same time unbelievably challenging. I worry that whenever we distill a concept so powerful and transformational down to just a 10-word phrase that fits comfortably on a bumper sticker, we can easily begin to take it for granted. We see it just go on by and do not always take the time to truly ponder what it actually means for us in what we are doing, who we are being right now. And because it's such a neat little phrase and rolls off the tongue so sweetly, we can forget just how complex being the change we want to see actually is. Just how much energy it takes to really become more intentional about who we are and who we are becoming. Changing ourselves to change the world requires that we take a long, hard look at both and then commit to making some important decisions. A number of years ago, I got a call from a family in a congregation that I was serving. They asked, "Bruce, can you come over to our home and help sort out a bad situation?" The youngest daughter of this family had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been managing her illness pretty well for a long time. But a number of stressful and challenging things had happened in her life, and she had slipped into a manic state. When I arrived at these people's home, this daughter was pacing back and forth in the living room, ranting rather loudly, convinced that her parents were plotting against her and insisting that she did not need to take her medication. Mom and Dad were there, trying their best to reason with her, to no avail. And the tension and the volume in the room just kept going up and up. Now, my initial reaction to walking into the situation was to join in the efforts, to try to somehow reason with this woman, to convince her that she was not okay and that she simply must take her medication. I tried speaking directly and firmly and forcefully, but that only seemed to make things worse. She could not hear me, and she just kept interrupting me and talking over me in a loud and angry voice. Now, I am not and never have been an expert on mental health or mental illness, but one of the things that I have learned is that it does not work to try to tell someone in a manic episode that what they are saying is not true, or that they should just not be so upset when they really are so upset. Part of some people's mental health issues is that they are feeling and experiencing things in a different way from those around them. That can be frightening, and it can be overwhelming. As I watched this young woman's parents keep pushing back and ineffectively trying to reason with her, they were becoming increasingly agitated themselves. As I watched this, I thought of Mr. Gandhi's words. And I thought of another phrase that I had learned during my time as a hospital chaplain. And that is that in times of conflict and unrest, there needs to be somebody in the mix that can be a non-anxious presence. Being the change that was needed with that young woman and her family that day meant being calm, being quiet and relaxed in a room full of people who were now almost screaming at each other. I took a deep breath, and that's what I tried to do. It was not easy, but after a while, talking softly and slowly and asking her parents to do the same, after a while we were able to gradually calm this woman down, to allow her to begin to feel safe. Eventually, we even got her to take some of that medication that really helps her. It took a long time and a lot of patience, but recognizing the change and trying to be it was the first step. This is what makes Gandhi's advice to us so brilliant and insightful, yet so challenging. We must approach problems not only by considering what we think needs to change, but then we have to discern how or what we must become to be that change. If, for example, we look at national politics in this country today, it is plain to see that too many of our elected leaders, and even a majority on our highest court, have all but abandoned the idea of democracy altogether. They are now willing to do and say anything to prove their loyalty to one man. And they will not stand in the way of efforts to silence the voices and the votes of any Americans who oppose them, particularly Black and brown Americans. At the very same time that billions and billions are being spent to wage a needless war, many folks right here in Kentucky are struggling with soaring prices for food and fuel, medical care, and basic life necessities. We are definitely in a downward spiral and headed in the wrong direction. So what needs to change? And how should we be? Well, I think that all depends on how we identify the problems which plague us. If all of this is simply a matter of ignorant, greedy, mean-spirited people clinging to power and adopting violence and oppression as the only means to an end, if it's them who are creating hardship for everyone, then we must be and become educators, activists, protesters, voters, people who actively work with others to remove these bad actors from their positions of authority. But if it is something deeper that plagues us, some shift in our national psyche that has led to so many of our neighbors being willing to accept and to go along with all these abuses and the suffering that they cause, if that's what it is, then that is another matter. I have come to believe that for so many, decades of decreasing prosperity and the rapid pace of societal change has created a sense of loss of traditionally held privilege. Misguided fear and frustration about how life just keeps getting harder and harder has led to a retreat into isolation, into tribal identity, which pits us against them. And if that is what is really happening, and I think it is, then what we must be, what we must become in order to address it and overcome it, is a little bit different. These times call us to be activists and advocates. But more importantly, I think they call us to be peacemakers, to be bridge builders, to be people who are willing and able to live by the values of interdependence, generosity, and compassion. Being the change that we want to see in the world must start with getting to know the people who live on our street or who live down the hallway in the apartment nearby. Breaking down those walls of suspicion and division that we have with neighbors who look different, who live differently, who vote and worship differently than we do. You know, a friend of mine from seminary is a Unitarian Universalist minister who lives in Minneapolis. And she was telling me recently when we were talking that when ICE agents began terrorizing her community, the only way that people were able to come together to effectively resist, respond, and protect one another was because they knew each other. The uprisings after the murder of George Floyd back in 2020 had created relationships and alliances that had endured. And those connections, those relationships were key to battling and surviving what was happening this past winter in Minnesota. My point this morning is that if we want to be the change we want to see in the world, we must be careful and thoughtful about identifying just what change is most needed, and then be mindful to change our own actions and words and attitudes to help bring that about. There are never any guarantees, and I think in most situations there's probably not just one correct path, one way to be. What might change and what we might try to be depends on our perspective, on our situation, on our experience. The part of Gandhi's actual words that I really like the most is the last sentence. Gandhi said, We need not wait to see what others do. And indeed, Unitarian Universalism teaches us that we don't live in a world that is controlled entirely by forces outside of us. Here at All Peoples, we teach our children that every person is important and that they are important too. The choices that we make can and do change us. And they can and do change the way the world responds to us, just as Gandhi said. So we all have to just keep trying, even if we're not always sure, even amid all of the complexity and challenges we face. We just got to keep trying and keep hoping. We must be hope, so there is more hope. We must be peace, so there is more peace. We must be love. Being those things will change us, and it very well may help change our world. Amen, and so may it be.